And joining us right now, the Rothman Orthopedics guest line, our good friend from USA Today, as well as the paintedlines.com Sixers beat reporter, Austin Krell. Austin, how are you, man?
I'm doing well, Mark. How are you doing today?
I feel like my team's lighting itself on fire is how I'm doing. I get firing Doc Rivers, but what I don't like is the idea, at least right now at this given moment, players, you're fine. Everything's fine. You guys are great, but we're just going to fire the head coach because, that's what else are we going to do at this point? First off, your initial reaction to Doc Rivers, and then what do you think this does say to the rest of the team at this given moment?
So my initial reaction was I wasn't surprised by it. It's, the first step. It's always the easiest step is to fire the coach when you underachieve. I think a lot of people are like, this is a disaster. They lost in the second round again. They also weren't really favored at all in that series. There was never a game really where they were favored. They were only favored to win game 4, I think, when the line closed by half a point, and everything else they were underdogs in.
All right.
So, you could argue that given what Vegas thought about them, that they, gave the Celtics all they could handle. But having said that, you come out in game 6 and you fight all the way back, which I thought was a testament to the traits and the spirit and the character that they showed all season long. And you hold a 2-point lead with 6 minutes left to go, and you don't score another basket until 30 seconds left in the game in garbage time. Then game 7 comes around. You get outscored in the third quarter, 33-10. That's 2 quarters in back-to-back games where you just simply had no idea how to attack a Boston defensive adjustment when they went with a double big lineup. Now, maybe we could say that lineup is, the sneaky weapon that the Boston Celtics are now going to ravage the rest of the NBA and win the title with. Maybe we can say that. But the bottom line is Doc Rivers said ahead of game 6 that they knew that was coming and they worked on it. And then in game 7, they had 2 days to work on it. And they were competitive in the first half. As soon as the third quarter went, again. So they had nothing. Now I will say this. Yeah. We can't pin this all on Doc because that would also excuse the likes of Joel Embiid and James Harden, which simply cannot be done. I've said this in the meantime. I've said this since then. I will continue to say it all offseason. This needs to be an inflection point for Joel. James at this point in his career, most of the book is probably already written on him, even though he did have huge moments in these playoffs to give them a chance in the series. He still was terrible in game 6 and in game 7. For Joel, this is really the first true strike against his legacy. People will say he's always underperformed in the playoffs, yada, yada, yada. There were other things that you could have said that were reasons as to why those teams didn't advance past second round, whether it be Ben Simmons, whether it be, roster construction, whether it be injuries, what have you. This was the first time where Joel simply was inexplicably terrible in the games that, and coming down the stretch of games.
Sure.
So this is the first strike against him where you can legitimately say, Joel, you didn't even show up. You are now a guy whose reputation is going to be painted as a guy who can dominate the regular season and is an underperformer to the highest degree in the playoffs. And when the moment is the brightest, you don't respond. So he'll still have time, of course. He's only 29 to change that narrative about himself. But this was a very nasty gash in his legacy for the way that he came out in this series. And firing Doc, in some senses, pardons that. That can't be them letting themselves off the hook. Whether James is part of the future still, whether whatever Joel is. That can't be them saying, well, it'll all be different next time now that Doc is gone. No, this was just as much more about the players than it was about the coach. And if they don't internalize that and grow from that and have this inflection point that they need to have, they're going to be in the same spot going forward. So
on that note, here's where I'm at mentally. And you can tell me if I'm just completely crazy, Austin, or if I'm like, oh, no, I can see why you'd feel that way. I'm in no way pushing Joel Embiid out the door. I'm not calling every team in the NBA saying, what will you give me? But at this point in time with James Harden, and I think with Doc Rivers being gone, I think that actually means James Harden's back, but we'll get to that. But James Harden, Joel Embiid, everyone on this squad, I'm listening. If someone gives me a call, do you want to offer me 4 first-round picks, a Rudy Gobert package, whatever it might be, maybe a little bit more because it is the reigning MVP? You have my attention. It's no longer in the realm of you can't trade it. Everyone's protected. Everyone's got to run it back. Like that's so far out of where I'm thinking right now. I think everything's on the table in this offseason. It was Doc Rivers. He was already on the chopping block. He's gone. Whether it's James Harden, Joel Embiid, I think everything is on the table because this Sixers team, I don't care who comes in here as the next head coach, whoever it might be. If it's the same roster, I'm going to have my doubts about this squad. Am I crazy, Austin?
Yeah, a little bit. So here's where I would say.
Okay, okay, stop me. Please stop me. Go ahead.
Number one, the guy just won the MVP.
He's
the vast majority of people who matter in terms of how you qualify, that they got votes and other people didn't get votes. Majority of them said that Joel was the best player in the league this season, most impactful player in the league. I don't think there's a very big historical precedent of you then saying, okay, he's for sale. Who wants him?
Right. Yeah.
After the season ends. This is a blemish in the career of Joel Embiid. I don't think this is the defining moment in the career of Joel Embiid. He still has a lot of time to make up for that. I think we can look at guys like Giannis Antetokounmpo, who wins MVP and Defensive Player of the Year in 2020, and then is embarrassed in the second round by the Miami Heat in the bubble a couple of years ago. They then turn around and they win the championship the next year. It's an inflection point in his career. I think you need to have lows sometimes to be humbled a little bit and to understand where you need to grow as a player in order to achieve the new heights sometimes. And I think that is one of the cases for Joel. I think you just can't. I don't know how you go about explaining that to your fan base as much as they are mad right now. I don't know how you say, like, hey, come back to us next year when we don't have Joel because we traded him, and come buy tickets and stuff like that, and come see Tyrese Maxey and a couple draft picks that we don't have until 2027, whatever. So I don't see that that's a viable path unless Joel says I want out of here, which I don't think he's inclined to do at the moment. I think that what needs to happen is Joel needs to do some soul searching this summer and this offseason. And I think the Sixers as an organization need to question everything that they once thought they knew about themselves. I mean, from the ground up, can Joel be the center of a team? Well, no pun intended, like not literally the center.
I understand. Yeah.
Can he be the focal point of an offense and that team can win a championship?
The core. Can he be the core?
Yeah. Yes. Can it be about feeding Joel first and then everybody gets the remain, gets whatever is left? He needs to challenge himself in ways and say, am I putting too much of my power and my focus and my affirmation in the regular season? Like, am I trying too hard to win approval in the regular season? And am I missing the grander picture that legacies and legends are created in the playoffs? I think everything from the way that they run their offense, from the way that they go about prioritizing everyone else within the offense needs to be questioned and pondered, because Joel as the focal point in the offense he got the ball and he couldn't do anything against Boston. And, do I think there were some, things with that knee where it was, where they kind of just let it quietly go away because no one asked about it? Perhaps he didn't have much lift against Al Horford on his shot. He couldn't burst to his strong side and dunk on people the way that he had previously. I think there's probably a little something there, if not more. But the bottom line is that they now have to question everything that they thought they knew about Joel, about themselves. And he has to do some maturing and looking in the mirror, because this was the biggest regression back to his pre-Doc Rivers immaturities that we've seen in 3 years.
See, it's interesting you say that, because I feel like when we've watched the postseason before, whether it was him and Jimmy Butler and Ben Simmons, obviously, or it was him and Ben Simmons before the Harden trade, and it was the Hawks game, as we all know, and now it's this series as well. It's the Heat last year. We're always talking about injuries with Joel Embiid, and we're always talking about coming up small in the playoffs. Like, it just always seems like that's the repeating theme. And I know you say he's only 29, but like it feels like he's an old 29 and he's going to be a really old 30 next year. And I love the guy and I've enjoyed the hell out of his career, but it just feels like this is a moment where, again, I'm not pushing him out the door. And I'm not saying, hey, bag of peanuts for Joel Embiid. But I'm just saying I think it's a time where the Sixers would at least have to pick up the phone and listen to the offer. I'm not saying they do it or pull the trigger, but that's just the headspace I'm still in. Although you did a great job of perking me up a little bit that he still has to do the soul searching, hopefully, and he comes back a better player next year. Now, a guy that could potentially maybe get the better version of Joel Embiid there's this long list of coaches put out there by Adrian Wojnarowski, and I don't know what you've heard, Austin Krell, about who the next coach of the Sixers could be if there's a front runner. I know people are talking about Mike D'Antoni, people are talking about Mike Budenholzer, all of these guys that could possibly take over for Doc Rivers. Is there a guy, or are there multiple people that you think would come in here and be like really solid at taking over and hopefully making this team take that next step?
Can we power rank it by the way that callers on the radio would pronounce their last names? Can we power rank it that way?
Definitely.
We would have Mike D'Antonio first. We would have I don't even know where they would go with Mike Budenholzer, right? It would just be
Hauser. They'd probably go Hauser.
Yeah. It would be a calamity of misfires of spellings and letters together. The way that from what I've heard poking around, it sounds like it's the core of coaches that Woj suggested. I think, D'Antoni would be up there. I think Cassell would be up there as a guy who everyone on that team flocks to. And I think Nick Nurse would be up there because he's schematically a very creative guy. I think the whole Toronto thing this season, it was more like everyone was tired of each other there. It had run its course, and I don't think that he would necessarily just I don't think he was a bad coach per se. I think it was just like it had been too long, and it was time for a change. And so maybe this is a fresh start for him. I don't know about his relationship with Joel. I know Joel's taken some passive, shots at him in press conferences before about about the crying for fouls and whatnot.
Sure.
So I do think this. I would say that. Whoever the next head coach is someone who should be younger and has energy to be creative, because I think what you see with coaches, especially in my experiences with Doc, and I like Doc as a guy, I think people blamed him for everything. I don't think he was at fault for everything, but I do think when you have, you're named a top 15 coach of all time, when you have all this experience and you've seen success, you tend to get a little bit ego-y and, I don't know what the word is, but, you tend to not want to listen to other people about your ways. And,
arrogant?
Arrogant is one of the words, I think it's just that his ego, you want a coach who hasn't proven anything.
In Italian, we'd call it testadore.
That
hard-headed. Yeah,
that's right. Hard-headed is the stubborn. Stubborn is the word I was looking for.
Stubborn is there you go. Yeah, let's speak English. Sorry. Yeah.
Yes, stubborn. When you've seen what Doc has seen, I can understand how you'd be stubborn, but that can also be your fatal flaw. So I think having somebody who is younger would be good. Having said that, if their goal is to retain the core of Joel and James and make everything copacetic, I would think that, if I were an odds maker, I would say the betting favorite would by logic be D'Antoni. Now I don't, we'll see what happens. But again, none of this really matters until the players take it upon themselves to own up to what happened. Mm-hmm. And, we can say Doc was this and that, and they weren't good enough, and it was the same second round exit as always. I don't think the Sixers view it as like second round exit or getting to the conference finals is our goal here. I think the goal is to be the best team in the league and be the last one standing when all is said and done. Sure. What if when all is said and done, the Celtics end up sweeping the Heat and sweeping whoever they play in the finals? You could theoretically come out of this postseason a month from now when things have calmed down and say, damn, the Sixers gave the Celtics the best run of anybody. Maybe they were closer than the second round exit implies that they were. And I do think there is something to that to be considered here, instead of just saying it's all over, it's hogwash, got to start all over again. But I do think that in terms of coaching candidates, Ime Udoka, is somebody who Houston hired. That's the right, it's a PR disaster in terms of his off the court stuff, but that's the type of mind that you are looking for as somebody who's a very good X's and O's coach. Very, will tell you how it is exactly to your face. I think Nick Nurse is a very plausible candidate. I think his X's and O's are excellent. And I think if we're looking to make players happy, then Mike D'Antoni would be in the mix. I'm curious to see what kind of standing Sam Cassell has in this whole thing, because he does have the ears of a lot of players there. It's a question, I think it's a question of, does he want to be a head coach? He looks, I'm not saying he doesn't, because I don't know the guy very well, but he looks very happy to be an assistant coach and loves to, be the uncle kind of character in this whole thing. Yeah. Instead of being the sort of the dictator per se.
Well, I do remember when he was hired and when Doc Rivers got here as well. I mean, all these guys like Dave Yeager and obviously Sam Cassell, all these guys had opportunities to coach elsewhere, like be head coaches, at least interview and be a finalist. And they said, now we're going to coach under Doc. And I always thought that was an interesting thing with Sam Cassell. Do you worry about too much carryover from Doc Rivers' ways into Sam Cassell's ways?
Yeah, I think it's always a thing that you can be concerned about. I think like everything that you hear from current and former players about Doc is why he is no longer the head coach. It's like that guy doesn't adjust to anything. Right. It's like Rasheed Wallace, the video that came out a couple of days ago. It was like, yeah, we would just go out of the huddle and then call up our own stuff because we were like, we're not doing any of that. Like, that's not exactly what you want to. Like, if that's floating around the minutes after you just get eliminated by 30 points in Game 7, it's not a great look.
No, Blake Griffin earlier in the year when they hit the 7 or 8 threes, whatever it was against the Sixers, he was like, oh yeah, they didn't adjust. It's not really something that's not that's a typical thing. Like whatever he said, but it was a hit. It was a hit at Doc Rivers.
Yeah. So I think what you're looking for here is like, you know what? Like James and, James is here. James, of course, but Joel, those guys should all matter in terms of who we choose. We want our players to like our coach, obviously. But we are looking for somebody who can adjust on the fly and is not afraid to get creative and get inventive during the regular season and use that as a period of experimentation, which is not something that Doc did very often. When they lost the Hawks series, right? Like he's running out Dwight Howard as a backup center when those minutes weren't going well. He's playing Ben Simmons and Dwight Howard together. He ran those lineups to death, and they were clearly not producing positive numbers. He stuck with them. That was the MO when he had the high-profile collapse in LA with the Clippers when they lost in the bubble. He kept playing Montrezl Harrell, who got played off the court by Jokic and the Nuggets. These are all – it's very similar characteristics. And I think, what you said at the beginning about how the message that this sends to Joel and James of like, you're off the hook. The Sixers hiring Doc within days of him being fired in LA sent a similar message. It was like, you don't need to do any introspection or thinking about why you got fired from LA. Just come to us. We'll pay you, 5 years, $40 million, whatever it was. He didn't have to, he wasn't forced to reflect on himself at all. And I think, there is some messaging that needs to go on there to the players, because until they figure this out, it's likely going to be a similar outcome unless there's a dramatic shift in the East.
Two last ones for you here. When it comes to Joel Embiid and Mike D'Antoni, do you think Joel Embiid wants to play for Mike D'Antoni? Because that seems like it would be a heavily favor to James Harden running things as opposed to Joel Embiid being the star.
I know that when they were looking for the Brett Brown replacement, Ben Simmons wanted Ty Lue and Joel wanted Mike D'Antoni, and the meet me halfway was Doc Rivers when he became available. So I think Joel would have interest in playing for Mike D'Antoni, based on the things that I've heard in the past. I don't know if that's changed now, but I do think that you tend to want to make decisions that your MVP endorses.
Gotcha. Understood. And then finally, is Tobias Harris back with the Sixers next year?
I don't see it. I tend to think that he will be part of the grand changes of of this roster. I think they need more willing 3-point shooters, guys that will make threes too would be helpful. Considering they shot, they shot like I think 7. I forget what the total team shot in total, but it was.
I know in the last 2 games it was 23% and 21% from beyond the arc.
Right. So not great, and that isn't all Tobias, but I mean he came in the year. I think I remember him saying the goal was like 6 to 8 threes per game. By the end of the playoffs, it was like taking 3 per game. So that's not good enough, obviously. So my guess would be that that's part of their grand, attempt to foster new trust from the fan base. Is like, hey, we've shipped out this forward, we made the roster and make it more balanced in some ways. But the reality is this: they rightfully will not warrant any trust from their fans as long as this is still the core of the team until they actually get over the hump. And the hump for fans who want to think about it as just second round, that's not the hump. The point is not to get past the second round. The point is to get to the finals and win a championship. Because we can sit here, as I said, a month from now and think the Sixers almost beat the team that won the championship. They were 5 minutes away, too many threes away from sending them home. It shouldn't be about getting to the over the hump of second round. There are much bigger goals at stake here, and I think for Joel, he has to reprioritize himself towards the playoffs instead of focusing on quietly focusing on the MVP, because I think that was he wouldn't say it publicly, but if I had to venture a guess, I think a lot of his thinking throughout the year was like, I have to quietly do this, but I want the MVP. And I think once he got it, his focus was not 100% on the series, if I had to guess.
Understood. Ladies and gentlemen, his name is Austin Krell. Make sure you read everything this man puts out there, all the piping hot content. You guys can check him out, of course, at thepaintedlines.com. Also an NBA contributor to USA Today Sports Media Group. Austin, great catching up with you as always. Thanks so much, man. Appreciate you.
Thank you.
The great Austin Krell joining us on the Ruffman Orthopedics guest line.